But have you ever went through tough times? Even when you're serving the Lord, I'm not talking when you're not serving the Lord, but when you're serving the Lord, have you ever went through times where you're like, what is going on? I have. And we call that a roller coaster, don't we? The times are up and down, and it's like when you're serving the Lord, sometimes it seems like everything could just go wrong, and we don't understand. And that's kind of what I faced this last week or so. My sister came down from Pennsylvania. She's part of the Christian Motorcycle Association. And there's a tent revival going on downtown Cambridge, and we were going to couple the two together and do a bike blessing and let people come. And the group from Pennsylvania was coming down. We had a group from Zanesville that was going to come up, and there was a lot going to be happening during the day, some different music, all kinds of different things that were going to go on, take place. And what happened, though, is one by one, it's like all these things begin to fall off, or roadblocks, plans changed, and I was calling my sister begging just to cancel, like, just don't bother, don't even come. And she's like, no, we're going to come no matter what. And I'm like, okay, but just no. But then, so they came, and we showed up yesterday, and some of you guys came out and helped out with it, and didn't know what to expect. But it seems like every time we tried to do something, there was just a roadblock, and it was frustrating, and it was discouraging. But then as we're out there yesterday, it really becomes clear, like there's a reason for that. There's a reason. There's many connections that were made for me, and being able to connect with different people in the community. And then there was people that were coming in. Somehow an advertisement ended up on the radio. Somebody picked it up, and we asked, well, how'd you hear? But it was on the radio, and we came by. But there was probably about 25 motorcycles that came up, and kids were bringing their bicycles too. That was fun. They were getting blessed. But people were eating hot dogs and snow cones, and it was a good time. But to be able to see ministry taking place, I realized, even when I'm ready to throw in the towel, when I'm like in this down moment, God still can take all of that and do something well with it. And that was exciting. It just reminds me, though, that there's times in our life, even when we're doing good, even when we're right, it's not like we're all messed up, but we can still have these ups and downs. And I've been preaching through Joshua, and what we see in their life, in the Israelites' life, is like this roller coaster of events. This big exodus from Egypt, that was pretty extreme. And then they get out into the wilderness. They see the hand of God in many kinds of ways. And then this generation has to die out. And then here comes Joshua and the next generation. And they have to cross this flooded river. And they, the story, we spoke about it. And they put the ark in the river. And the water is held back. And that's pretty spectacular. And then they go to Jericho. They march around Jericho and they shout and they watch the walls fall down. Man, that is pretty exciting. What they thought was going to be failure, but yet God turned into success, and they're excited about that. And then they get to Ai, and they think, well, man, God has done these awesome, wonderful things. This little town, this is nothing. We don't even need to send all of the army. So they go up there, and then they get kind of defeated for a moment, and they take off running. They lost some soldiers, and they're like, what in the world is going on? God has always showed up in a big way, and now here we are again. Of course, they had to deal with some stuff. Achan had taken some things, and they had to deal with that and become repentant. But then they realized that God wasn't there to display his strength as much as he was to give them a strategy on how to win. And they went back and they put the strategy into play against Ai, and then they had success. And that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot to deal with in your life spiritually, to see how God is doing all these different things. And then at the end of Joshua chapter 8, I won't read that part, but at the very end, after the battle, they don't celebrate the victory. What they do is they build an altar, and that will preach right there. That will preach. They don't jump and shout, no, we won. They come and they build the altar as told to him by Moses through the Lord. And they built an altar, And they called everybody out, everybody, and they began to read all of the law, the curses and the blessings, and they stood on 2 different mountains, and the whole assembly gathered together, and they built this altar as they were told to build it, and they wrote in the stone, probably in the mortar of the stone is what they did, and they wrote the law down in that, and they renewed this covenant. They reconnected with the Lord. And that's a moment you think, man, that's spiritually healthy. We've come through a battle, God showed himself mighty, and then we come through a defeat, and God showed himself faithful. And then they've come through that. They've come through, using the Lord's strength, and they've come through by using his strategy. And it's like anything that's after us, we can accomplish because we are on the Lord's side. And they gather around this altar, and it's got to be this incredible, awesome, spectacular moment. Like if it was the church, the congregation, we'd say, that's a healthy church. That's healthy. But the thing is, when everything is going well, when everything looks spiritually healthy, when you think, man, I've got this, that's when the enemy shows up. And not with swords in their story, not with armies, although they had armies against them, not with intimidation, but the enemy shows up this time with deception. And that's how he works in your life. That's how he works in my life too. Sometimes we prepare for attacks. We get excited at church. We read a good passage in the Bible. They're all good, but I'm just saying one is really exceptionally good to us that day. But we hit this moment, and we're excited, and we go out and think, man, come on, devil. You're not going to stop me. And we go out looking sometimes for the enemy because we are so pumped up and ready and charged. No, yeah. The gates of hell shall not prevail. And we look for attacks from the enemy that look evil, but sometimes we can miss the attacks that look reasonable, that don't look anything out of the ordinary. And that's what Joshua 9, as we read through that, we're going to today, it teaches us these things, that the enemy comes when we least expect, that the enemy looks different than we expect, and if we aren't careful, it causes us to live beneath what God has intended. The first point I want to give you today is the enemy comes when we aren't expecting. Joshua 9, 1 through 6. As soon as all the kings were who beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland and all the coast of the great sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning, and they went and made ready provisions and took worn out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, and worn out and torn and mended, with worn out patched sandals on their feet and worn out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us." Israel was expecting another battle. They come into this land. They knew they were going to have to defeat some people. They've already encountered one. Then they've encountered another. They're expecting this battle. And we know that the other kings had assembled all as one, right? And they're expecting a war. They're expecting swords and spears and fights. Maybe to have to use a strategy like they did at Ai, where they have to hide in one spot and lure the people out and then attack. That's what they were expecting. But the Gibeonites came pretending to be weary travelers. The Gibeonites showed up with old sacks and patched up wineskins and moldy and crumbly bread and worn out sandals. So Israel may have been ready for war, but they weren't ready for deception. And here's the thing, though. Victory can create vulnerability. We have victory in our life, and you know what it's like to be on the high side of a victory. When you experience a victory, it feels good, doesn't it? And the thing is, with our victory, this isn't to bring you down, it's to make you aware. With our victory, it can create a vulnerability. After Jericho and Ai, Israel was likely pretty confident. They learned a big lesson at Ai to say, even if it's not the Lord's strength, He gives us strategy and we can trust Him no matter what we're against. They had to be confident. They had this momentum going. They dealt with issues and they still overcame, and they had to feel good as a nation knowing they're walking in the blessings of the Lord. We know how God moves. We've seen Him do this, that. And even when we've messed up, He's made things right and He's come back and He's with us and we're doing great. But spiritual victories can sometimes produce spiritual relaxation. You've seen this play out, let's say a football team. A football team will go out and they'll have a game against a rival, and everybody want to watch that rival game. And they're going out there and they fight hard and both teams are prepared and you're rooting for your team, and man, your team pulls it out. It was fought hard, but they won and they walked away. And the next week, they play the weaker opponent. And the weaker opponent is also often the dangerous one because the team relaxes. The team stops practicing as sharply. The team just assumes victory and they lose focus. Have you ever seen that? See, many believers don't fall during crisis seasons. Many believers fall during comfortable seasons. After promotions, after blessings, after church growth, after answered prayer, after successful ministry. What can happen sometimes is we stop being as desperate in our prayers. We stop being as prayerful. And the enemy loves to attack. The enemy really loves to attack right after you've had a breakthrough. You look at Elijah on Mount Carmel. What a display of God's power. To stand up against Jezebel, to stand up against 450 prophets of Baal, to stand up and call fire out of the sky, to make fun of their God because he is sleeping, he is away on a vacation, whatever it is you want to say, dancing or watching them dance all day long, and you getting up with confidence knowing that today is the day the real God is going to answer by fire, and a whole nation turn their hearts back to the Lord because he dared to stand up in this big moment and call on the Lord, and God came down in a big way. And then he goes out and he's depressed and he's sad and he feels like he's the only one. He just had this huge victory, and then the enemy likes to come in right after this moment, right after a victory, right after a spiritual high. And a lot of times it's because we tend to lower our guard in those moments. And it's good to be thankful, it's good to be happy, but in those moments we can kind of lower our guard and the enemy can sneak in. 1 Peter 5:8 says this, "Be sober-minded, be watchful, because your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he can devour." We're called to be watchful. We're called to be sober-minded, vigilant, to be looking, to be paying attention. We're not called to be fearful. We're not called to be paranoid. We're called to be awake. We're called to keep our eyes open and be watching. I read an illustration or some statistics from a group called Hutzler Law. And according to their study, 52% of crashes happen within 5 miles of your home. 77% within 15 miles of your house. and more than half of serious or fatal crashes happen within 25 miles from home. And a lot of that is we're so familiar with that stretch that our guard goes down. It's so common that this road, and we don't think so much about it. When you're driving in a new place, you don't know the territory. You don't know what waits around the corner, and you're watching. But when we're familiar with it, we just kind of coast through, and a lot of times that's when the accidents can happen. I thought about this as we traveled down to Arkansas this week or last week. When we got into the vehicle, what we do every time that we go on a trip somewhere, we pray. Do you guys pray before you head out? It's a good thing, right? But here's what hit me this week. Every time we get into a vehicle and we take a trip, we pray before we go. But when we jump in the vehicle to go down to Zanesville, we don't pray before we go down there. And I proved my point. Within home, we're so comfortable that it's not, our vulnerability is there. We just don't put as much caution. We don't watch as much. And that's what happens. The enemy come in when Israel wasn't expecting. And he'll do the same thing to me. He'll do the same thing to you. Not only does the enemy come when you aren't expecting, point two is this: the enemy doesn't always look like we expect. Verse 7 through 13. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" And they said, "From a very distant country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and the king of Heshbon, and to Og the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go meet with them, and say to them, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And these garments and these sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey.'" See, Israel was expecting soldiers, and what looked like appeared in front of them are not soldiers, but more like survivors. Israel expected threats, but yet here they are in this moment of sympathy. Israel expected danger, but what they see looks like people in need. Israel expected to maybe hear some hostility from somebody, but what they heard was flattery from the enemy. Deception works not because it's so absurd. Deception works because it's very believable. Verse 14 says this: "So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord." If there's one verse that ties this whole chapter, really, so much of our life together, it's right there. So the men took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel from the Lord. What they did not do is use discernment. They began to look at a situation, look at the enemy, and they began to make judgment calls with their mind, but they did not use their spirit to discern what was going on. Discernment is much more important than appearances. Matthew 7:15 says, "Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly there are ravening wolves." You know what that means? There's going to be people that look just like they belong, just like they're one of the flock, but they're not. We can't base it off of what we see. We have to be able to discern things. And one of the things I remember my father always saying, when this passage came up, talking about wolves in sheep's clothing, he used to always say this: you know how you can tell a wolf in sheep's clothing? It eats other sheep. Think about that one. How do you tell a wolf in sheep's clothing? It's eating sheep. The Gibeonites didn't arrive looking like the enemy. They arrived looking humble, looking harmless, looking sincere. But Satan himself will imitate righteousness too. 2 Corinthians 11:14-15 says, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. It's not always obvious by the eye of what's going on. We know that the enemy can look just like one of us. The danger that we face isn't always obvious. And the Gibeonites, they even spoke respectfully about God. Remember I said they used flattery. They said this: your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him and all that he did. If people came in to hear and say, oh, I heard God is doing such great things, I want to find out about God. I'm here to find out about God because, oh, I heard this testimony and that testimony. And we would be flattered. We would be, yeah, well, come on in. We want you to learn all you can, and we want you to have that experience too. See, the enemy knows that. He knows what to say to get our guard down. The enemy doesn't always look like what we think he should. Their words, these men's words may have sounded spiritual, but their intentions were deceptive. We have to use discernment. We're warned about people who have the form of godliness, but what do? They deny the power thereof. Something may look spiritual. Guess what? It probably is. But it doesn't mean it's the Spirit of God that's driving it. The enemy himself is going to fool some by signs and wonders. It's not always what you see. We have to connect with the Lord. We have to use discernment. We have to listen and talk to God. The enemy often comes disguised as opportunities, as relationships, as distractions, as compromises, reasonable shortcuts. This is what you have to know. Not everything that's dangerous looks dangerous. Am I right? The serpent came into the garden. Now I know you might not like snakes. Some of you might think the only good snake is a dead snake. You know that. But at this time, there was no fear of animals, and there was no reason to be scared of anything. And this serpent shows up and convinces Eve, oh, doesn't that look at this fruit. Oh, yeah, that does look good. She didn't see the danger in it. It was to be desired. Oh, this isn't going to hurt anybody, but yet it hurt everybody, didn't it? And that's how he comes into our lives. He doesn't just burst in on the scene and say, I'm here to ruin everything. It's little deceptive ways. When it comes to finances, just use a little dishonesty. It's a little white lie. Oh, we'll just overestimate these numbers on our taxes. I mean, it's the government. Who are they really going to say anything anyway? Oh, I'm just going to have somebody else clock me out at work. I know I'm, not really there. But all these little bitty things, we can justify it. Hey, it helps my family, or there's enough money in this big corporation. They're not going to miss any of it. See, that's how it begins. Rarely does it begin that the enemy approaches you and say, hey, would you make an agreement with me? Let's destroy your integrity, right? Really more starts like, well, this is just going to be a little easier on you. Let's make life a little easier. And this works in relationships too, because Relationships don't enter our life aggressively like, hello, I'm here to wreck your marriage. It sounds a little more like this. They enter sympathetically. Well, this person understands me. Well, this person will listen to me. This person makes me feel valued. But watch out. Same with church. Even in church, we can fail to see danger if we focus on what the appearance of what success looks like. When we begin to judge attendance, let's count how many people are here, and that's going to tell us if we're doing well or if we're not. Let's count the offering and see how big it is. That's going to tell us if we're successful or not. How good is the music? That's really what we need to focus on. How interesting is the preacher? That's what we need to, we begin to look at these things and we can miss what's really important. It's the appearance sometimes of success, and yet churches who begin to focus on these things can be so focused on those things that it becomes less about the Lord and more about their view of what other people see them as in the community. And I'm telling you, we're here for God. We're here. This is His house. We've devoted everything for His worship, and He can do with it as He wants. But we have to watch out because the enemy is very deceptive. He's counterfeit. Everything that he does is counterfeit to what God has. And counterfeit money, it's dangerous. Why? Because it looks real. I mean, if you were working somewhere and you're taking money and somebody came in with monopoly money, you would have to laugh at them, right? Because who's going to fall for that? They don't do it that way. They come in with counterfeit bills. Nobody tries to pass a fake $3 bill either, right? They counterfeit what looks real, what looks right. And to get people to learn how to spot a counterfeit bill, they don't study the fakes, they study the real thing. To be able to spot a counterfeit, they look at the real bill, they understand the texture of it, the weight, the watermarks, what it's supposed to be like. They study the real deal, and that's how they become able to spot the fake, is becoming very familiar with the real. That's why discernment matters. That's why spending time talking to the Lord matters, to know what's real and what's not. Because the enemy doesn't always show up looking evil. Sometimes the enemy shows up looking helpful. So Israel, they were faced with these people and they began to examine the bread. And they examined the shoes. And they examined the wineskins. But they never asked God. You can analyze facts and still miss the truth if you leave God out of the equation. If you want to spot the fake, you got to become familiar with what's real. You don't want to end up making compromises with the enemy, and here's why. Point 3 is this. Compromise makes us live in ways that we never expected. I'm going to read the rest of this chapter, starting in 15. And Joshua made peace with them, and he made a covenant with them, and let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. At the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were neighbors and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath-Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, that all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. We will let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath that we swore to them. And the leaders said to them, let them live. So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, why did you deceive us, saying, We are very far from you when you dwell among us. Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood, and drawers of water for the house of my God. They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it. So he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel. And they did not kill them, but Joshua made them that day cutters of wood, drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to this day in the place that he should choose. And here's the thing. Even the enemy knew that they were commanded by the Lord to do away with all the inhabitants of the land. And they didn't. What happens when we make a compromise, we have to live in ways we didn't expect. They weren't expecting to deal with these. And here's the thing. Because they did not rid the land of the inhabitants of the land, there was some carryover from the inhabitants of the land that just caused problems in Israel as they moved forward in their lives with the Lord. Here's what happened with Joshua. Joshua's stuck in this situation. He makes a covenant with the Gibeonites. Israel discovered the truth. The enemy had been living there the entire time. Because of the covenant, they now had to live with the consequences. Because of this agreement. And that's what the enemy wants to do in your life. Because he knows that one moment of a compromise can create long-term complications in your life. Just in one quick moment. Israel was still God's people. Israel was still victorious. Israel still blessed. But now they had something living among them God had never intended for them. There's consequences in our life. When we make agreement with the enemy, he may not have total victory, but sometimes we have to carry things around with us that God never intended. Sometimes we make a little agreement, we end up with hidden habits, thinking, I'll control this. It's okay. This isn't a problem now. What about later on when addiction controls you, or anger controls, or bitterness controls you? One impulsive choice in a moment to shop with your credit card can cost you debt, stress, pressure, anxiety. God didn't intend you to live under that. How about in our culture? Churches slowly begin to accommodate the culture to avoid discomfort in the world. And then they wonder years later, how did we ever lose our conviction as a church? Compromise rarely changes everything overnight. It's little by little. And it slowly alters what we learn to tolerate. Here's the thing, though. Even in the midst of that compromise, it wasn't what God intended. But Joshua did make a covenant, and Joshua honored the covenant even though it was made foolishly. And that matters. Because God still, even when we don't do everything as we're supposed to, God still cares about our integrity. Even when we make mistakes, God calls us to walk truthfully. And God still used the Gibeonites later. God can still redeem consequences even when compromise creates them. So I want you to think about this morning. Is there anything that you have allowed into your life without taking it to the Lord in prayer first? Is there anything that you've agreed, made an agreement with, that you haven't sought the Lord and what he says first? Maybe this. Maybe you've made some decisions that are based solely upon appearances. Maybe you've experienced spiritual victory, and are you in this moment of just relaxation and not watching? Are you consulting God or Do we just merely inspecting evidence? Joshua 9's not just about ancient deception. Yes, that happened back then. But it's about us today. It's about how the enemy can come in unexpectedly, how the enemy can disguise himself very cleverly and get us to compromise and change things more than we ever realize. But again, the answer is not fear. The answer is to stay close to God. The answer is to keep communion with God. Israel's fault, they did not seek counsel from the Lord. So that's the warning of Joshua 9. Seek counsel from God. Talk to the Lord. Ask Him before you make a decision. You can see things, but ask the Lord about what you see and listen for His voice. Not just in a crisis, but after the battles too. Not just when things are rough, but right after things are great. Not just when life falls apart, but when you think, man, everything is going well. Especially after the big victories. Some of the greatest dangers, they don't arrive with swords drawn. They arrive with moldy bread and worn out shoes. Be on guard. Watch. Pay attention. And talk to the Lord. Do you think that's something you can do? How many of you believe that? You can do it. That's right. So as you go out of here, I find in my life, personally, the enemy likes to attack right after Sunday. For a preacher, you come in on Sunday, you spent the week for this moment, and you come and have a service, and then Monday morning hits, and that's when the enemy likes to creep in a lot. And I have to be on guard. And same with you. You walk out from a message, hearing about this, think, okay, don't be surprised if you see the enemy. But don't be scared. You haven't been given a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. And if you think, well, I don't know if I can do all this, you can. He's given you the ability to do it. You got this. You can make it. And when the enemy comes, hey, talk to the Lord. Because He might show you a big display of strength. He might give you a strategy. But either way, don't just be moved by what your eyes see. Be moved by what your heart hears from the Lord. Amen?